In this chapter of the MPC2000XL series, we'll take a look at the remaining sections such as the mixer, the loading and saving, the MIDI sync, and other, most of which should also work on the non-XL model. If you find the clip useful, tap the thumbs up, subscribe, ding the bell, and check out the channel for other chapters and more walkthroughs on other gear just like this one. Those already experienced with the 2000 can check the index in the description area below for the specific features, or skip over what you already know using the index markers across the timeline. For best viewing, I suggest putting the clip in full screen mode on a TV, desktop or laptop. Switch the resolution to 1080p via the settings widget down the bottom right, and that should help increase the visibility of the small display. As a tip, it might be a good idea to have your MPC nearby and pause the clip between each feature and test out the functions as you go. With that said, let's jump straight into the features inside the MPC's mixer by holding down Shift and 7 on the keypad. First up, XL owners will need to select one of the 4 drum programs. If you're unsure what drum programs are or how they work, you should probably check out the episode on programs for a detailed walkthrough on what they're all about. Essentially, each of these vertical levels here represents the volume level for each pad that you can hear via the MPC's stereo output. Each pad also has its own relative pan control too, which you can access by pushing up on the cursor keys. And this view of 16 channels relates to any one of the 4 pad banks, along with numbers for each corresponding pad, which you can see here labelled vertically, the bank letter followed by a pad number. If you cursor to the right or left, you can move horizontally across any of the 16 pads in the current bank, and by rotating the data wheel, you can increase or decrease the volume level for any selected pad. Further to that, you can jump directly to any specific pad in any other bank by selecting another bank and then tapping on one of the 16 pads. And again, you can cursor up to the rotary icon to access your pan control, and rotating the data wheel in either direction will adjust the selected channel's left and right stereo balance. I should probably mention you'll need both your rear stereo left and right output jacks connected to correctly hear the changes to your pan settings in a stereo field. If you need to adjust multiple channels at the same time, you can press the All Channels soft key. Once the All Channels soft key is enabled, it'll toggle to clear, and so pressing it again will clear the All selection. And by rotating the data wheel, you can increase or decrease all volume channels at the same time. Or if you cursor up, you can do the same for your pan controls. To group a specific selection of pads, you can just hold down Shift and tap on multiple pads. Then by rotating your data wheel, you can adjust those particular levels. Or cursor up to adjust those selected pan controls all at the same time. And again, pressing the clear soft key will clear your selection. Finally, there's one last method to adjusting your volume and pan levels, by selecting a pad and pressing the Open Window button, which will open the Channel Settings window. Here you get an overview of all mixer settings pertaining to any particular pad you select, in a neat little pop-out window. Starting from the left, you have a numeric value of what your current volume and pan amount is, along with values for the individual output channel, plus which effects bus and how much send level to your effects has been applied, if any. The Follow Stereo option here can be considered like a priority feature, where the individual channel setting will follow or adopt the value from the stereo mixer for the currently selected pad. Those of you lucky enough to have the effects board installed can make use of the Effects Send tab. I personally don't have the effects board installed, but I can tell you routing sounds into the effects board is fairly similar to setting your volume levels. If you press the Effects Send soft key, you can cursor up above the level gauge and select either Multi-Effects 1 or Multi-Effects 2 or Reverb 1 or Reverb 2. Then you can dial in the desired amount of effect send to that effect processor by selecting your pad sound and dialing in the amount of effect saturation with your data wheel. So you could have just a little bit of reverb or a lot by adding however much you want and on whichever sound or sounds you want. Next, and not to be confused with the stereo output, is the individual output mixer, which exclusively manages volume levels via the 8 individual outputs. If you don't have the individual output board installed, then don't worry about what goes on with this tab, because essentially there are 2 mixers, one for your stereo output and one for the optional individual output board. And it functions fairly similar to the stereo output tab, except due to the presence of the 8 physical outputs, you can route your pad sounds through any of those additional outputs. And if you have stereo samples, you can route those through pairs of outputs, like 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, and so on. Plus, there's a cool little trick I use when I need that little extra by combining the stereo mixer with the individual mixer to achieve 10 individual outputs, or possibly even 5 stereo pairs out of the MPC. All you have to do is turn down the levels of those pads that are routed to the individual outputs from the stereo mixer. That way you can remove pad sounds from the stereo output that are routed to the 8 individual outputs, which essentially then paves the way for your stereo output to be used as an isolated pair. And if need be, you can then pan your sounds hard left or hard right if you need to use your stereo output as a dual mono configuration. Now let's take a look at the Mixer Setup tab by pressing the F4 soft key. In here we've got a few options that allow us to customize the functionality of the MPC's mixer. Starting with the top right, we can cursor over to the global master level, and using the data wheel you can add an additional gain amount of +6 or +12 or even negative amounts if your output is too hot. It's probably wise to calibrate this to a nominal level based on your mixing console or audio interface specification. Beneath that we have the effects drum program assignment. Here you can nominate which of the 4 drum programs you want to use your optional effects board with. Next up we have the stereo mix source option, and by default this is set to program, which means all your stereo mix settings reside inside your programs. So if you change to a different program, then that particular program will have its own unique set of mix settings. And if you save this particular program to disk, then those settings will return when you load that particular program up again. Alternatively, if you select drum, then this option will place all your stereo mixer settings into your drum program slot, which us XL owners have 4 of. And if that's the case, then those values would then get saved inside your All Programs and Sounds file, aka your APS file. Beneath the stereo mix source, we have the equivalent setting for the individual output board and the effects board, where you can choose to have either the program or drum program slot retain those particular mix settings. Below that, we have the copy program mix to drum program, yes or no. This can be useful if you're using program changes to change the current drum program to another program, aka kit. If you're wondering how to do that, then check out the section on program changes in the sequencer chapter. The terminology can be a little confusing, but if you set this to yes, this function will copy your current program's mix settings to the drum program slot, in my case drum 1. And this option may be really useful for non-XL owners who don't have the luxury of having 4 drum slots, but then again I'm not even sure if they have that option. Anyway, next we have record mix changes. With this option set to yes, you can record fade-ins, fade-outs, and pan your sounds from left to right or vice versa. Basically, you can automate your volume and pan controls within your sequences. And the way this is done is similar to recording a beat, the only difference being that you use the data wheel in real time to move volume controls up or down or pan controls from left to right. Any mixer event information is recorded into your currently selected track as MIDI data. So what I normally do is designate a specific track or 2 exclusively for mixer automation data. And that way you can mute the automation track in real time, and it also makes editing automation data via step edit a little easier when it's not all heaped in the same track with your pad or note information. Check out the sequencer episode for more about step editing. So for some of you, particularly those that don't have the 8 output option installed, this can be quite a handy feature to make use of, as it gives you the ability to mute, cut, drop, fade in or fade out your parts. You just need to make sure this record mix changes is set to yes and you're good to go. Then when you record or overdub a track, you'll be able to dial in level and pan changes, which is essentially mix automation. However, it is MIDI automation values. You can't fade audio, but you can create incremental changes in volume and pan values, which ultimately won't have any bearing on your samples until they're re-triggered. Further to that, you can fine-tune your recorded mixer automation via Step Edit, and you can even insert mix automation events in there too. So I'll record a little bit of mix automation via the mixer page. Once that's done, we can visit Step Edit to see what mixer automation looks like. First, figure out which track you'd like to record the automation on. I'll just select the first unused track I can find. Assign the drum program to it. Then we go into the mixer page via Shift F7, select my drum program, then record and play. Or you can even overdub an automation mix by using overdub and play. Okay, good, that's enough. Now, via the main screen, okay, let's give that a quick listen. Alright, cool. Via the main screen, jump into Step Edit. While holding down the Locate button, use the event arrow here to skip to the first or next event, regardless of wherever it is. And now we can see the controller ID for the first mix event that I recorded. And arrow again to see more of them. So I can see the type of mixer event it is. I can see the pad it's affecting and what the value of level it is. As mentioned earlier, you can check out the Step Edit section in the sequencer chapter for an explanation on how to cut, copy and paste or even insert mixer events. And as we progress further into the sequence, you can see they're labelled appropriately with either stereo level or stereo pan, and which pad it's affecting and what value of level or pan it is. The thing to remember is, by default, your mix events are applied to programs, which means if you use the same program on a different track, any mix changes previously recorded will also affect those sounds in the same program, which is another reason why recording the automation data in a separate track is probably a good idea, as it means you can mute your automation track by simply toggling that particular track's mute status. So next up, let's take a look at how we can sync the MPC to another device. If we hold down Shift and press 9, we can find the functions for the sync page. But first, just a word to the newbies struggling with the concept of sync. You don't need your MPC to be in sync with another device if all you're trying to do is trigger the sounds inside your MPC. Triggering sounds inside your MPC is more about configuring the correct MIDI channel and port setting, which I cover in the sequencer episode. If you want sequences you've recorded inside your MPC to play along with another device, then sync is what you'll need to configure. And here you've got a few different types of sync options available to you, depending on whether or not you want your MPC to control other devices or another device to control your MPC. This is what's commonly referred to as having a sync master or slave device. The sync master controls or sets the pace for the slave devices, and there can only ever be a single sync master, while you can have multiple slave devices that will follow the master. So by working on the left side, these options here pertain to your MPC being a slave, while configuring options on the right side pertain to your MPC being the master. And the sync master will delegate the tempo and when the slave devices should start and stop. A slave device will generally wait to be fed the tempo along with the start and stop cues to run their own internal sequences. Under mode, you've got a few common types of sync methods to choose from, including MIDI clock, MIDI timecode or MTC, or maybe even SMPTE for those that have the SMPTE option installed. The most common types of sync you'd want to use to sync to other MPCs or sequences is MIDI clock. And the MIDI clock is the simplest to configure. It provides a stream of pulses that allow external devices to follow along or slave to the sync master. But MIDI clock can also transmit some basic transport controls that most slave devices, generally speaking, can recognize, such as start, stop and continue, which is handy if you have a few devices all slaving off your master device. You've got a shift offset that you can use if your slave devices are lagging behind. You can move the clock sync back earlier in millisecond increments to help reduce any possible lag or latency of those devices being synced. And this option here, MMC, MIDI Machine Control, put simply, is not a type of sync, but a universal set of transport controls. This was a popular option back in the days of multi-track recorders because it catered towards a distinct set of controls that were generally found on various analog or digital tape machines, such as play, stop, record, fast forward, rewind, eject, among others. Next we have MTC, MIDI timecode. Similar to SMPTE, MIDI timecode doesn't adhere to tempo as such, but rather absolute time in the form of hours, minutes, seconds and frames, which you may need if you're working to film and video. However, it might not be an appropriate option if your song contains tempo changes, but if you don't have tempo changes, then it's a suitable option. Just make sure you make a note of your song's tempo. Some of you may have the SMPTE board installed, unfortunately I don't. However, what I can tell you about SMPTE is that it's a timecode developed by the Society of Sony Motion Picture Television Engineers, which is what SMPTE stands for. Similar to MIDI timecode, SMPTE is a digital timecode that utilises absolute time in the form of hours, minutes, seconds and frames. Similar to Serato, however, it doesn't contain any tempo information. SMPTE was a popular option back in the days of tape machines, as SMPTE can generate an audible timecode that allowed producers and engineers to record to tape, giving them the ability to resync sequences and other kinds of devices back up to the original timecode and potentially laying down more tracks, which was a popular option for remixing original songs. And the way it works is you connect a 1/4-inch jack up to your MPC's SMPTE output, press play on the MPC, and record the timecode signal down to a multi-track recorder, like a tape machine, for a predetermined amount of time. Then you could patch that recorded timecode back into your SMPTE input and sync your MPC back up to it. And due to the absolute time embedded within that code, you could resume playback from anywhere in the timeline, and the syncing device would be instructed to catch up to that specific point in time as well. Because it's a universal standard, it meant even if other producers were using other devices, like an MPC2000, SP1200 or some other SMPTE compatible device, they too could lock up perfectly to your song. The frame rate here, which is also required for SMPTE, instructs the MPC how many frames per second, aka FPS, is required. The term frames is a reference to frames used in film and video, and there's a few general standards such as 24 frames per second, 25 frames per second, 30D frames per second, or otherwise known as drop frame. Drop frames don't actually drop a frame, instead it drops time every so often to make up for shortfalls in the timecode. And you've also got 30 frames per second. The general rule here is you can choose any of these frame rates you like to generate timecode, but if you're syncing to an already generated timecode, then you'll want to know how many frames per second that timecode was originally generated with, in order to sync your device to the original code accurately. If you're not sure about what frame rate to use, just run with 30 FPS. Generally speaking, it won't be an issue unless you need to sync it to someone else's timecode. So armed with that information, you should be able to make an informed decision about how you want to integrate your MPC with any other gear in your studio and whether or not you need it to be the master or a slave. As the 2000 has multiple MIDI inputs and outputs, you can nominate which of the MIDI ports on the rear your 2000 will send or receive from. If you choose to have your MPC as the sync master, you can nominate which MIDI output port you want sync to be sent out over by selecting MIDI port A, MIDI port B, or both MIDI ports A and B. If you're slaving your MPC, then you can configure which of the two MIDI inputs your MPC should listen on for incoming sync, either port 1 or port 2. Next we have the dump tab. The dump tab on the 2000XL is a dedicated function for transferring sounds over MIDI. These days it's probably the least practical feature the 2000 has to offer, but this kind of thing was useful on something like an SP1200, which doesn't use up so much memory. Insert blatant plug for how to send SP1200 sounds over MIDI on the ToneLab Quick Tips channel. But with jokes aside, if you consider how long it takes to transfer something like a 10 meg file over a MIDI cable, being more than an hour, it's definitely not something you'd want to use in the middle of a session. Plus, it only transfers sound files, not programs, nor sequences, nor songs. However, if you've got removable media, then you can transfer WAV or SND files by loading up your SD card, USB stick or compact flash into your computer, which would be much quicker. And if you don't have those, then you could just use the digital SPDIF input and output on the rear of your 2000 along with your DAW, provided your audio interface has digital SPDIF input and output. Check out Chapter 2 on sampling about how to do that. So last in this section, we have the MIDI switch configuration page, which I think were originally intended for foot switch pedals, but there are no physical foot switch jacks on the 2000. Strangely enough, there is on the MPC3000 and 4000. So what you can do with these is use MIDI continuous controllers, aka CC messages, to trigger any of these 4 configurable switches to do whatever you set them to task with. So you could use any MIDI controller ID you want from another sequencer or DAW to trigger your 2000 to activate a sequencer play start, play, stop, record and play, overdub and play, record and punch in, overdub punch in, tap, which is the tap tempo, and I think this might also act as note repeat toggle. You can change the pad bank to A, B, C or D, or tap any pad from 1 through 16. And you can also activate the soft keys F1 through F6, which can give you access to a bunch of different features across various pages. So make sure you have a look through here, because these could help you create some shortcuts to assist with recording parts or performing parts in a live situation, like activating the solo soft key on the main screen, among many other functions. Next, we've got the other section. So access these features by holding down Shift and pressing 8 on your keypad. In here, the first option we have is tap averaging, which works in conjunction with the tap tempo button. By default, 3 taps on the tap tempo button will calculate an average beats per minute for your MPC's tempo. You can change this to 2 or 4. I generally like to have this on 4 because sometimes heavy use of the note repeat can confuse the MPC into thinking you're trying to change the tempo. You've got the contrast control. If you hold down Shift and spin the data wheel, you can lighten or darken the text contrast. On the next tab, we have the initialize option. With this, you can factory reset all the settings inside the 2000 to their original state. This might come in handy if you've just bought an MPC and can't figure out why something isn't working, or it might come in handy if you're selling an MPC, but just make sure you save all your work before activating this by pressing the Do It soft key. Finally, for this section, we have the version tab. This tells you what your MPC's current operating system version is, and we can see the date of the operating system too. Wow, okay. Almost 18 years ago from the day I recorded this. Nice. So next we'll get into the storage options the MPC2000 has to offer via the load and save sections. Holding down Shift and 3 on the keypad takes us into the load tab of the disk functions. Here you can view and select any of your storage devices, browse folders, create folders, load, save, or even format your storage media. And using the Open Window button, you can get a better view of your folders along with the files inside them. Plus, you've got a few additional functions such as rename, delete, and new to create new folders, which makes file management a little easier too. Using a data wheel, you can browse files and folders. Pressing right on the cursor key will enter into folders, and cursor left will exit. Then browsing vertically with your data wheel, then pressing the close soft key to exit out of the pop-up window. And if for whatever reason you find yourself stuck or lost, just hit the load soft key to return to the root of your directory. If we cursor up, we can filter the kinds of files we'd like to view. And if you're browsing for sounds for your pads, you can load a sound by finding one and hitting the Do It soft key. Then you'll be presented with the Load a Sound pop-out that has 3 options: play, discard, or keep. So you can audition the sound you're trying to load by pressing the play soft key. You can abort the mission by pressing the discard soft key, or you can allocate a pad for your sound by pressing any particular pad and then pressing keep. You don't necessarily have to allocate a sound to a pad. If you just wanted to load a sound into the MPC's memory, then select the Assign to Note option and dial down to off. Then press the Keep soft key. And that will just load your sound into memory unallocated. You can load single programs, single sounds, and sequences one by one, but if you try to load a .all file or an APS file, these kinds of files will delete either all your sequences and songs or all programs and sounds in the MPC2000's memory. Over here, the MPC can give you a readout in kilobytes on how much memory you have left for sounds and how much memory you have left for sequences and songs. And above those, you have the size of the sound you're looking at. So if we take a closer look at my ATAPI compact flash reader, here we can see the device selected for browsing and the type of format the device has been formatted in. The 2000XL can read MPC2000 or non-XL model discs, MPC3000 and MPC60 discs, Akai S3000 and Akai S1000 discs, even MS-DOS discs. So if you have compact flash cards, SD cards, USB sticks, etc. that are formatted for MS-DOS, PC as it says here, you can read them in your 2000, which is handy if you want to load WAV files from your computer. As long as they're 16-bit, 44.1 kHz, you can load them up provided you have enough memory. And for anyone considering an MPC2000, or if you haven't yet decided on what storage option is right for you, or you're considering an upgrade, then this next section should help shine a light on the topic for you. There's quite a few traps for new players, so it's best to know what to stay away from when deciding on what storage device might be right for you and your MPC. So first, a little about the common types of storage options that the MPC2000 refers to under these device options, which goes right back to the original factory-shipped 3.5-inch floppy disk drive, or maybe even the internal iOmega zip drives, or maybe the MCD drives. Some of you watching may even have various optional accessories too, like the SCSI CD-ROM players. Some of the luckier owners out there may even have the harder-to-come-by 8MB flash ROM installed, while others may even still be using the old magneto-optical drives, or MO drives for short. This unit here was my first MPC I bought new way back in '99, and this was factory stocked with a 3.5-inch IDE floppy disk drive mounted on the front side. These were later replaced with 100MB zip drives. So some of you watching may still even have those in your MPCs. But since operating system version 1.2 came out in 2005, meant once installed, you'd remove your old IDE floppy drive or zip drive and replace it with an ATAPI compact flash card reader or some other type of removable media device. Which is what I did with this one. I replaced the original 3.5-inch floppy drive with an ATAPI compact flash card reader. The bad news that I didn't know at the time was that operating system 1.2 removed the partitioning feature. So even if your compact flash or SD card was 8 or 16 gig, there's a measly 1 GB format ceiling on ATAPI devices anyway. However, with regard to SCSI devices and using operating system 1.14, you can make use of larger storage capacities with the help of the partitioning feature, which allows you to segregate portions of larger drives to an extent You could potentially format a SCSI drive up to, say, 4 gigabytes or more if your SD card or USB stick is big enough. I've seen some cases where people have formatted their cards with 26 partitions with 587 meg in each partition, making use of a little more than 15 gig of a 16 gigabyte card. And to make it even more confusing, 1.2 can read partitions made on earlier versions of 2000 OSs, despite it not being able to create them itself. So like I was saying, it can be quite a minefield navigating all these pros and cons. But the good thing is, these days you do have better options at your disposal than you did opposed to when the 2000 first came out, like internal SCSI to SD card drives or external SCSI to SD drives, RASCSI, Blue SCSI and Zulu SCSI, which can provide 7 times 4 gigabyte partitions or even more with a 64 gigabyte card using a locator switch. And you can purchase those from samplerzone.com, link in the description area below. And while those are great options, not all devices are a best fit for your 2000. I've seen quite a few people end up replacing their internal drives with an SD or USB floppy emulator. Now, for anyone considering these for their 2000, don't. Just stay away from them. And here's why. Most people with a 2000 probably have 32 megs of RAM on board. That'll give you the ability to record 16-bit audio at 44.1 kHz for a little more than 6 minutes. Even if you don't have 32 meg of RAM on board, the stock RAM on board is 2 meg. A floppy emulator is mimicking a floppy disk drive that stores 1.44 meg at best, which equates to just a little more than 16 seconds of sample time. So when owners decide to purchase and go to all the trouble of opening up their units and installing Gotex or some other type of floppy emulator, you're only buying yourself an option that will offer the same storage amount of a 3.5-inch floppy disk, which is 16 seconds. You're much better off at looking at SCSI options, otherwise you're going to have to get a pad and pencil and write down what songs or sounds reside on each image ID of your floppy emulator. Now, floppy emulators can be suitable for an old 80s sampler with only 750 kilobytes of memory, but it's really not an ideal option for a sampler that can use up to 32 megabytes of memory. Plus, that limitation will have consequences over how you work, because it dictates your longest sample time to that of what a floppy image can store. Plus, you'll probably end up needing to use multiple floppy images to save programs and sounds and sequences that pertain to just one song, and that can get unnecessarily laborious. And you'll probably end up looking like someone in one of those infomercials having an inferior product moment. And the other thing is, you don't really need the 1.2 operating system upgrade to use with SCSI devices. You could still be on OS 1.14 or earlier, and then that means you have access to better partition options, opposed to having no partitioning in operating system 1.2. In fact, the way I remember it, operating system 1.2 was more an offering for those wanting to use internal ATAPI devices such as removable media. It really didn't offer much benefit to those using SCSI storage devices. I'll update the description area below from time to time with links and some partition configurations that work well for other users. So if anyone wants to chime in with comments about their success with partition configurations, please do, as I'm sure others will appreciate it. Okay, so moving away now from the physical drives to another storage-related caveat you should watch out for, the file name convention. The MPC2000 can support up to 16 characters per file name. However, when browsing your files and folders, you'll only see the 8.3 character convention abbreviation. So it's wise not to use folders and file names that are too long, nor can you use special characters or spaces. For those reasons, I just stick to numbers and letters and keep my file names to a maximum of 8 characters, or shorter where possible. I could go into even more detail on why that is, but instead I'll leave some details about it in the description area, and shout out to Garth from samplerzone.com for some of the overhead on these caveats. So if we hit the Format soft key, this is where you'll find some of the formatting options for the various types of media we've just covered. Most of them are straightforward, but in relation to the SCSI option, this is where you'll find your partition options on earlier operating systems if you're running anything earlier than 1.2, like me. And just so I can show you a word about using SCSI devices, in regard to the SCSI channel option, there are 7, one of which has to be your SCSI host, in our case the MPC. And that resides on the first SCSI channel, 0, Generally, you'll have to configure your SCSI devices to reside on their own exclusive channels. Old iOmega drives, like this one here, had a little switch on the back of them that you could change from 5 to 6, which meant I'd have to dial either 5 or 6 into my SCSI channel here for the MPC to fund my zip drive. They also have a termination switch too, which is also necessary if you have only one SCSI device in the chain, as you need the last device in the chain to be terminated, so check your SCSI device about how it can terminate. The main thing you need to consider with SCSI devices is what the best configuration for you is in terms of how many partitions, partition size and compatibility. If you intend to use your media in both your computer and your MPC for file sharing, backing up your sounds, etc., then partitions can render your media unreadable by computers. There's a lot of SCSI options around now that achieve more storage than others, so it pays to do a little homework first, because the biggest concern you'll have going forward is how to get the most bang for your buck when it comes to maximising the storage for your MPC. I'm quite sure operating system 1.14 allowed you to configure 26 partitions A through Z, along with customisable sized partitions. However, there are some pitfalls involved with partitions, so I'd encourage anyone out there watching this to share their experience in the comments to help others make an educated decision about what drive may be best for them. I know most of the partitions are not accessible by computers. In many cases, only the first partition is accessible by a computer, so if you're trying to use your removable media to transfer files between your computer and MPC, you might only be able to view the contents of the first partition, if any at all. So the decision to partition your drive might need some consideration if compatibility with the computer is required. But as a final word on SCSI, external SCSI devices are much easier to deal with because you don't have to open up your unit to install them. You just need a compatible cable to fit, which I'm quite sure is a female DB50 to male 50-pin high-pitch SCSI cable. These can be a challenge to source these days, but you can find them or connectors to make the connection with a little perseverance. As a word of caution on SCSI devices, they're not hot swappable. So you want to make sure all your SCSI devices and your MPC are off before you connect and configure them, as you could potentially blow a fuse, and if that happens, it means you'll have to open up your MPC and replace it. Now, a tip for those with the compact flash card reader: some may have experienced a freeze or crash when trying to save. I've experienced this myself, and I've got a theory on why this is and how to work around it. I think either the MPC2000 or the card readers themselves are going into low power mode or sleep mode. So after a certain amount of time idling, trying to save your files could freeze up the 2000 and you'd lose everything, which is something that's happened to me a few times. So then I tried experimenting with the times and the unit itself, and it could be something like 20 minutes or more. Some card readers may be more or less, but what I do as a workaround is I go to the load screen instead of the save screen, and what I found is that this wakes up my drive from its hibernation state, if that is what it's doing. And then I'm able to jump back into the save window without incident. So give that a shot next time you're about to save after a prolonged amount of time. For those wondering what the FROM device is, this is more or less another storage destination you can access if you have the flash ROM board installed. It gives you 8 MB of non-volatile memory, so even when you power off your MPC, the files you stored on FROM will be there when you power back up, just like modern day NVRAM. It gives you the same functions as other storage options like load, save, format. You can create folders, but the difference is that it has a defragmentation function, which is what you'll need to run every so often after saving and deleting files, because when you delete a file from FROM, the data allocated becomes empty space, which can be difficult for larger files to use. So if you run a defrag on the FROM, then you can utilize unallocated blocks again. Having covered all that, we can now discuss the file types that the 2000 offers to save and load, which are the .all file, which you'll see quite often. And this type of file will either load or save all sequences and songs. A MID file is a MIDI file and will load or save a single sequence in either two formats, MIDI Type 0 or MIDI Type 1. Type 0 will merge all tracks onto one track, so you probably won't need this that often. while Type 1 will save separate information for each track. So most of you will probably find MIDI file Type 1 more appropriate for exporting or importing MIDI files between a DAW and your MPC. An APS file, which you'll probably be working with quite a bit, is an instruction to load or save all programs and sounds in the MPC's memory to your storage device, or vice versa. A PGM file is a program file which saves program data, but not the physical sound itself. However, it does possess the ability to load the sounds that are allocated to the pads within it. An S&D file is basically an Akai sound file that is commonly allocated to your pads, and these files are normally referenced by PGM files, but you can also save these independently. A WAV file is probably what a lot of you already know about. It's a Windows waveform audio file format that's compatible with most PCs and Macs. So you can edit these or load these from your computers into your 2000 as long as it's 16-bit 44.1 kHz mono or stereo. A .seq file is a single sequence. You can save or load a single sequence from the MPC's sequencer. Then there's this rather unassuming file type that some of you may recognise, and they are the MPC60 or MPC3000.set file types, which might come as a surprise to some of you, but yes, you can load MPC60, 60 Mark II, and also MPC3000 sounds into your 2000. A .set file type is more or less the equivalent of a PGM file for the earlier MPC60 and MPC3000. The strange thing is, the MPC60 actually samples in 16-bit, as it does have 16-bit analog to digital converters, but then compresses samples into a special nonlinear 12-bit format, which is kind of cool if you think about it. The 2000 can actually load 12-bit samples from an MPC60 or 60 Mark II. The architecture is much earlier than the 2000, which is to be expected, so when you're loading up MPC60 sounds, they appear as regular S&D files, but if you try to load a .set file from an MPC60, you'll have to manually allocate them to the MPC2000 pads. So obviously there's a little lost in translation there, but not the sound itself. Last of all, we have the setup page. Here you can nominate the primary device your MPC will check automatically upon power up. And you can use this to automatically load a default kit of sounds, plus an already configured sequence for your studio. I've done a small tutorial on the auto load feature on the Quick Tips channel, so I'll add the link in the description area below. Anyway, that's all for this clip. I hope it's helped you out. If so, let me know by hitting the thumbs up, subscribe, and check out the channel for more walkthroughs just like this one. And feel free to check out ToneLab via Instagram @ToneLab. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.